Hi, Nick. Can you hear us? We are
Yes, I
now
can hear you.
about
Yeah.
to start. Okay, great. So maybe you can switch on your camera again so that we see you on the big screen. Yes, wonderful. Hello.
Hello,
Okay, good.
everybody.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to M+. We're excited to present tonight a talk with Nick Deocampo, who is calling us from Manila, titled Collective Filmmaking in the Philippines. We would also like to welcome our online audiences because this talk is going to be streamed also on our YouTube channel and Facebook. And we hope that this will be a quite interactive session, where you're also invited to talk with Nick and us. And we will start the session actually with an introduction of the speakers, obviously, and then a short PowerPoint presentation of some of his key works that are interesting for us to debate. And then we will have a 40-minute talk with Nick and then open the floor to Q&A for 20 minutes before we invite you all to come down to the screening of the first Nick Deocampo A Counter Cinema 1 program at 8 o'clock. So I'm Silke Schmickl. I'm the lead curator for Moving Image at M+, and I'm today with my curator colleague, Ariadne Long, who is working in our visual arts team. And both of us are part of a research group called Networks Remapping the South. That's a research area that many of us, also some of us are here in the audience, work on. And this is really one of the key research areas that looks at the region, how Hong Kong is part of the South, the relationships that we have with our neighbors, and also using really the network not only as or we use it also as a methodology, to really think about how can we connect and how can we resurface also some of the relationships, that we have with our neighbors. So I hand over to Ari to invite or present Nick.
Hi, everyone. This is Ari Long. Allow me to give a brief introduction of our dear guest, Nick, today. Nick Deocampo is a prize-winning Filipino documentary filmmaker, film historian, and pioneering advocate of queer cinema in the Philippines. Currently, he is the associate professor at the University of Philippines. He used to study under filmmaker Jean Rouge in Paris for a formative experience for 1 year. He acquired a degree in theater arts in his home country and got a master's degree in the cinema studies from New York University. Since the early 1980s, he has been actively engaged in enriching the cinematic landscape with perspectives that are at once challenging. And he also organizes influential series of workshops, for example, the UP Film Center and for the UNESCO, that inspire international young filmmakers. He is also a prolific writer and scholar, authored and edited several books on early cinema and its history, creating new reference points in alternative Filipino culture with works that portray members of his communities and friends through films. So can I ask you, Silke, can you introduce us more about Nick's practice and why we will have him to be with us tonight and how this relates to the M+ program?
Yes, sure. So hello again, Nick. I mean, we're really very, very honored to have you with us. You're a friend of many of us, but also really an exceptional scholar, filmmaker, and someone who has really intensely sort of studied, this slice of history that characterizes Southeast Asia and also, as I said earlier, our interests. So there are several reasons why we wanted to bring Nick. First of all, it's really his cinema, his films that we love and that are very relevant for the M+ collection. As Ari just said, Nick studied 1 year under Jean Rouge in Paris and really became a sort of passenger of ideas, and brought also certain types of filmmaking, such as the cinema verite style essay films, to the region, but also made something very unique out of these things that he experienced in France, but also in Germany and during his travels and studies overseas. But also one of the other reasons beyond his cinema is really his writing. We have already some of his books in our library. I just brought one down from our research center, but we're also in the process of acquiring actually all the books that he has written in recent years. And this scholarship, as I said earlier, is extremely relevant for us because it is focused on the one hand on the Philippines, but also Southeast Asia and also sort of world cinema. And, we feel like this sort of layering is also very much in line with how we work at Hong Kong and M+, like looking from the region into the world, and how especially the medium of the moving image connects these different cultures and approaches. So we have actually, Nick, we will start now, I think, with the PowerPoint, just to give the audience a quick insight in some of the things that we just said. And then we will invite you very actively, to speak about some of these conversations. Okay, so just to start, Nick has been extremely influential around certain film practices in the Philippines that were also marked by workshops that were organized by different foreign cultural institutes. The Goethe Institute was one of them. And this was really the time, when Germany wanted to promote a different image of the country, and they paid a lot of attention to bringing like more experimental artists, performers, musicians, to these institutes all around the world to, just after the difficult period of World War II, to show that Germany has now a different sort of approach to cultural exchange. So the images that you see here is on top, you see Nick in Berlin with his hat. It was probably very cold during that time. But also some images of these workshops that the Goethe Institute organized in Manila, but also in Bangkok. They also took place in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in Korea. So this was actually a regional sort of activity. But two of the workshops, the one in Manila and Bangkok, really stood out. They, encouraged a whole scene to work with the film material. And as you can see on the pictures, this was all still analog film. Because that was difficult to access, costly. And so these workshops provided a wonderful platform for artists to experiment with this medium. On the next slide, these are just some snapshots, to show the vibrancy of these years. All these books are taken, images are taken from the book by Tillman. You saw the cover just before. But I also want to highlight that Nick just published a book that has actually many more pictures of that era, and that we're also, as I said, in the process of acquiring. So next time you can find more images in our library. But here on these images, you see very prominent Filipino artists such as Rox Lee, Kitlat. We see also Lav Diaz. It's a whole, like actually all of the famous filmmakers from that era have been at one point involved in these sort of activities. And I love these photos because they speak also really about the joyful approach of doing something together, just the joy that also comes with these collective activities. Here are some examples of the books that we mentioned. So alternative cinema, the one on the left, is extremely relevant for us as a museum. So this is an incredible sort of survey of the alternative filmmaking in the Philippines, was just released very recently. And the Keeping Memories that you see in the middle is also an important publication that thinks more about the region. So this was published as part of CEPABA, which is an important audiovisual conference in the region. So also highly recommended. And then on the right side, you see also some more national focused sort of publications that really look at the culture, history, and literacy of the Philippines. So just to acknowledge also that Nick is extremely active also in the festival world. So we have here an example of the Pink Festival, but also, as Ari mentioned earlier, his membership in UNESCO at the Memory of the World project. And the publication on the left side, which I have also with me if you want to browse through later, is a festival that I was fortunate to attend at the university in 2019, which was an incredible, really presentation of all these artist films that have often not been seen or, are really rare found. So I'm looking forward to working with Nick also on, imagining how we could maybe bring some of these programs also to Hong Kong in the future. And here we can just quickly click through. So these are just slides that present or introduce the films that we are going to show in the next 3 days. So we have the first screening tonight at 8 o'clock, tomorrow at 5:15, and on Sunday at 3 o'clock. So we start today with Oliver and Revolutions Happen Like Refrains in a Song, the earliest really remarkable documentaries that Nick made in the 80s. There were 3 films. One of them is lost. Maybe Nick can tell us a little bit more about this later. Tomorrow we show the Philippines, a legacy of violence, and the sex warriors and the samurai, also two really, really stunning works that explore also the roots of this sort of violence and the repetition of history. And then the last program presents Private Wars and also Isaac. So these films are much more focused on the idea of the patriarchy and, you know, Nick's own sort of personal histories. So we show now a 3-minute extract, just to give you also a sense of the films, and then we show the full series.
I saw a revolution happen. Not often does one get to witness a revolution unfold in one's lifetime. Everyone knew it was coming, but at what time and in what place, nobody knew. Then on the night of the tiger moon it came. Millions came to see the downfall of an aging ruler, as the tiger moon rose to its peak, devouring along its way the crumbling past. People ran out into the streets, invoking God and cursing evil. Change was long in coming. I bore witness to this event. In the midst of it all, I found myself a speck in the millions who crowded in the streets wanting change to happen in their lives. I was insignificant to the whole march of time, except that I saw it happen and arrested its moments in my film, preserving it as memory. Then I realized my triumph over time. It took only 4 days for the revolution to happen. It took years for its reasons to take shape, the ascendancy of Marcos to power, those grim years under the martial law, a totalitarian regime, the killing of Ninoy Aquino that killed democracy. I grew up in those years that will forever remain as scars in my mind. I grew up first in hunger, then in fear. Even if many of our people wanted to fight back, silence was all they could give. I saw many of them grow up in those 20 years, keeping to what little decency there was left to remain human. Others, however, couldn't do more. Some became prostitutes, criminals, and rebels. When the revolution happened and we, the people, were out in the streets, I knew we had all the reasons to fight for change. And we saw war, a war between brothers, a war between two opposing forces of common ancestry, one committed to change, the other for servility. But only one had to win. The tiger moon had to be laid to rest.
Hi, Nick.
Hi.
Hi. So now we're going to our next sections of the conversation. So Silke, allow me to have the first questions. I will start it with the simple one. It's like, how do you see your different roles as a filmmaker, a producer, a film scholar, and a festival organizer?
um, yeah, I really saw all of these roles that I played as a kind of a response uh, to the needs that I saw all around me. The Philippine society is a very dynamic one. Your attention is being pulled from almost every side. There are always economic problems. There's political struggle. There are gender issues that we need to address. And on top of it, you know, I have my own intellectual pursuits. And so all of these taken together, they all present some kind of an ecology of needs, wherein as somebody who was growing up, and I grew up under martial law. I spent 20 years of my life. In fact, my formative years really happened under the military regime. And all of this role playing, maybe that one can consider, were really trying to attend to all of the needs I had to fulfill, that I had to respond to. A lot of them are pretty much economic. In other words, I engage in workshops. I had to work, my 8 to 5 job was really to run workshops. And wonderfully, workshops do not just offer you a kind of an economic livelihood, but rather, and it's not much, it doesn't pay much at all, but it also attended to my intellectual growth. In other words, I was able to tie in together a lot of my other essential needs, in all of these things that I did.
Yeah, I think that's also something that I observed when talking to other filmmakers from that time, that working collectively and taking on so many different roles was just a very natural reaction to also the lack probably of institutional infrastructure, support systems, so it was really a navigating through the many possibilities and challenges that were there. And I think it's also maybe interesting for us to hear a little bit how you thought about these sort of also collective moments, because the way you worked with other filmmakers in these different roles or as a scholar, we're not really a sort of closed and very organized collective, with a manifesto, or because we know many artist collectives, who have a very pronounced and clear approach to what this collective should do. But it seems in your case much more open and fluid, within the country, but also then in these international sort of realms.
Yeah, working in a collective really it helped me define a community, and that was very important. The sense of community was all that we had. First, we really looked at ourselves as a marginalized sector. In other words, I am saying this in reference to the mainstream movie industry in relation to cinema. So we've got a very strong overly commercialized movie industry that in many levels were very exploitative, to a point that even renowned filmmakers like Lino Broca, Ismael Bernal, names that maybe some of you know, had to react very strongly against the infrastructure of escapism and commercialism. Now, Lino Broca had his response within the movie industry. And the kind of cinema that I identified myself with, and may I even say this as a matter of retrospection, that I may even have engineered during those very difficult times, was really to create a space outside of that cinema. The only way to do that would really have to be in a collective way. No, collective not in a very rigid, as you said, dogmatic way that, we had very strict rules about it. But sure, I issued manifestos. I think I was the one who issued manifestos to give us some kind of a guideline. Some ideological, others political, many times aesthetic, but these were responses to a cinema that really tried to be, exclusive only of its own commercial kind. So the cinema that I've been promoting, and may I say, this screening in Hong Kong is very timely because I'm now celebrating the 40th anniversary of the time that I engaged myself in this kind of cinema. So I started in 1982 by studying the documentary in Paris, France. So that was where I was exposed to a different kind of cinema. So when I arrived in Manila after my studies in Paris, I didn't know that I was almost like going into the eye of the storm. Because you must keep in mind that by 1982, a few months after, the arch enemy of President Ferdinand Marcos, Ninoy Aquino, was shot dead at the tarmac. That was when I really picked up my Super 8 because I trained in Super 8 in Paris, and just started shooting because I thought all hell just broke loose. There was nothing to There was nothing to be lost anymore. I mean, we already sort of hit the wall, and there's no other way to go but be engaged with the social change. So with this very strong urge, very strong need, there were other filmmakers around me who we may say, are lost souls, who cannot be accommodated in a commercialized movie industry, who may not really wanted to work in a commercialized setup. We had other passions. We had to document the events that were happening. So many people were being killed, disappeared, raped. So much violence was there. And so it needs a different cinematic response. Seeing all of this, and maybe my exposure in Paris because of the cinema verite and the collective form of cinema, I tried to duplicate that in the Philippines, but in a different register. And true enough, I was able to put together, through workshops, mind you. So education was my strategy. It was through education I was able to gather together young people, some younger, much younger than myself. And what was crucial was that we had a sanctuary. We were able to create a space where we could produce and make our own films, where we could be creative in the time of violence. And that for me was very important because it created a network, but more significantly, an alliance among creative artists who had many other roles to play in society: political, activist, educational, artistic. So to a certain point, the space that I was able to create through the workshops, first I did at the University of the Philippines. Then even there, I became a pariah. They did not renew my my term anymore after 5 years. Then I was able to find a sanctuary, a space within the movie industry, which is the biggest irony of what I did. And I was able to, for 25 years, create workshops that would shield many of those who just want to make films, experimental films that for many people did not make sense. But for me, were political statements in a very indirect and symbolic way, turning cinema into signs and symbols that still reflect the political turmoil that was happening. So my response really is that collectivism was for me really a way of creating a community.
Yeah. And can you maybe describe a little bit how these workshops then unfolded? How did the participants, how got they selected, and, how did you introduce them? Because, I mean, I said it earlier that the Germans were really also for the Goethe workshops, at least, so eager to send experimental artists like Rosa von Braunheim,
Yes.
Harun Farocki, artists that we all know,
Big
that we
name.
also have in the collection here. But, how did this encounter happen, and what was your role also in welcoming these artists and being maybe a sort of mediator between the participants and these guests?
It's a long story, but I'll cut it short. I really, wanted a job, and there was this essay writing competition which I won for, well, maybe around $10, which is the equivalent now, and I needed that money to pay for my food and my rent. And then when I won that award, I was taken in to work. And the first thing that was given to me was to run a workshop. I am a theater person. I studied theater, but I love cinema so much so that I tried to pretend my way into organizing workshops, and I just loved it. And the interesting discovery I did then was the tool, the equipment that we could use. Super 8 was an amateur medium. The technical people around me were laughing at me, saying that you don't use Super 8 in order to teach because Super 8 is automatic. Everything is automatic. Students will not learn anything from Super 8. But I was persistent because it was accessible and everything. To cut it short, I was able to just overcome the technical fears that I had of the technology and went on into the pedagogy of what I was doing. So my study of theater and a lot of my reading in cinema really helped me to brave my first classes. Of course, I would like to think I knew better than my students. So who are they to even question me? No, so with the first success of the workshop that I did, it was the first workshop, wherein we were able to produce 9 films, whereas the first 4 other workshops, even run by renowned filmmakers like Lino Broca, Ismael Bernal, Peque Galiaga, big names who tried to run it, they were not able to produce films at all. So here I was, an amateur, but my love for cinema, and maybe the generational connection I had with the students helped a lot. But anyway, we started producing films, and from out of the 9 films, the next thing I asked an organizational person like myself is, so what do we do with these films? So what I did was to organize a festival, the first festival in terms of short films. And that was the turning point. There, I issued my manifestos, I organized this, and all under the nose of the regime. Interestingly, 1 year after, the daughter of the president, and now she's a senator, Amy Marcos, what we feel now is the power behind the presidency of the new Marcos regime back home here, is that she organized a similar a similar festival. So I was competing with the state-run festival, and that was scary. That was scary because I can just be lynched. I had no resources to give to the students except the passion that we had. And well, after organizing it for 4 months, for 4 years, suddenly, I had to leave the university because they did not want to renew my employment because I was just maybe, just too hot, with what I'm doing. Surprisingly, however, when I found work in the movie industry, that was when I was able to revive and expand some more. I could even do queer film festivals. I could do experimental festivals. I could do retrospectives. I could do a lot of things. Now, to your question of the alliance that I created, I just discovered that the international film community had cultural offices, such as the Goethe Institute, such as the Embassy of France. They all have cultural divisions. I was able to get scholarships because of those. And so the next thing is to converse with the cultural attaches and say, what programs do you have in terms of film exchange? And films are very attractive, and it creates communities instantly. And from then on, we were so lucky to have one of the most dynamic directors of the Goethe Institute with the name of Dr. Uwe Schmelter, who was really a buddy, director. He was not very, very official, but he drank with us. He shared a lot of private time with us as well, eating, having, attending a lot of these events. And with my knowledge of the artists in Europe, I was able to ask, well, in order really to make a change in the movie industry, we need to really attend to a change in the visual language. So this, I think, is my biggest contribution when I started really to be insistent that we need to have experimental filmmakers to come to the Philippines, because I have studied German cinema, and since the 70s, the new German cinema creating a film language really created a revolution internationally. And so with that, and with Uwe Schmelter and the directors earlier, they were very open to bring this. So in the end, I would really say that education was really my key in terms of my advocacy, in terms of this shift in the cinematic transformation of the Philippine film landscape.
Yeah, maybe I have one follow-up question just on the workshops, and then I think we expand the topic. But would you also like to say a few words about the MAUL Fund, the Movie Workers Welfare Foundation, a very crucial support system as well for these?
MOWEL Fund, or the Movie Workers Welfare Foundation, is a social welfare arm. You see, the movie industry is so highly exploitative. The government doesn't even have insurance health, medical, death benefits, educational benefits. It gives nothing back to the movie workers. So a movie actor who later on became president, who later on became the first president to be impeached, set up an organization which is called Mobile Fund. And at that time, they were doing educational workshops that competed with what I was doing in the university. But when I lost my job, all right, which was a tragedy for me, my students who migrated to that Mobile Fund started inviting me and said, why don't you teach here? And so the first workshop I did was a total success. You know, it produced a lot of creative films that started winning in film festivals. And so I was hired. Little did I know I would spend 25 years of my life. In fact, the best moment of my life, I think, you know, my youth was spent there, but no regrets, you know, because it was really, as I said, creating a sanctuary wherein at the time when film was analog, there was no other place where you can run to and make films because you need all this equipment. And this mobile fund was awash with all the top of the line equipment. That mattered a lot. What it needed was a pedagogy. And that's what I had because I was coming from the university. Education is my thing, so don't mess up with me when it comes to education. And so the films, you know, I know the aesthetics, I know the line where we were going. We are not going into the movie industry or the industrial cinema way, which is a big irony because the institution that hosted us was actually being funded by the movie industry. It seems like the board of directors didn't even know what the hell I was doing. You know, I was just given, you know, as long as, you know, our film started winning, as long as we're being productive, and as long as much of the budget came from many of these cultural institutions. So it was Goethe Institute spending for the films, spending for the laboratory. What we had was the creative contribution. So to a certain point, again, Silke, what you said that, you know, creating the collectivity, I was not very conscious about it, but, you know, we had the creative talent. The embassies had the material resources. Mobile Fund had the space to accommodate us, but the space we're in, I look back now and I find it so funny. It did not have the top of the line film school materials. We were teaching under the mango tree. I mean, the Philippines is blessed, you know, during summer just to have a lot of sunshine. And so, you know, we would even have workshops under the mango tree. Of course, there are moments where we also have typhoon, but there were a lot of times where in under this wonderful sun, you know, we could be doing our workshops with nature, right? So these were really wonderful things. So in the end, I guess the movie industry had enough of me, just like the university. So I again lost my job, but I went back to the university now as a professor. So this is where I am now, and thankfully, people are now beginning to realize what I was doing. That now we can look back that during those moments when we created those alternative cinema, we defined a new form of cinema. I think one of the most robust in Southeast Asia, if not in Asia. And I contributed the historical, the chronicling of it. And with the book that I have written, we now have a very clear history of one of the most sustained alternative film movements in Asia.
Thanks. Are
No,
you grabbing the book
sorry.
and showing to everybody?
I just have to grab my new book, which is 888 pages.
Wow.
All right, very thick book. I'm very proud of this. This contains the entire history from the very beginning, the arrival of cinema in the Philippines, down to the latest digital productions, down to the regional cinemas.
Yeah. Nick, you just mentioned the alternative cinema. I found it's very interesting the way that you once said in an interview. what is produced in alternative cinema? It's people's cinema. It forms a virtual community for those who are unable to meet in person. I'm here. I want to ask you a question is like, what does alternative mean to you? And has the content changed today? And how does it relate to all ordinary people?
Well, alternative cinema, I am audacious in claiming it to be the people's cinema. Because the industrial form of cinema, the movie industry, that postures itself to be the national cinema, is really behind it are forces that make it suspect of being really a national cinema. So this is where I get ideological and I go into a lot of debates. This is where I lose some friends, all right? Because I am not one to believe that the industrial form of cinema, that first of all was very much a product and a creation of colonization. Hollywood really is a strong force in shaping that, in controlling the medium. And as the only colony of America in Asia and perhaps even in the world, together with Puerto Rico and Cuba, cinema was really used, as an instrument from propaganda down to this ideological formation so that the majority of the Filipino people and many people in the world is that the only cinema that there is the mainstream commercial cinema. I beg to disagree. And history will bear me out. But in articulating that, one needs to give it a name. So what is an alternative cinema? Alternative cinema is a very referential term. It is a reference. And to what does it refer to? All right, so it cannot really stand on its own. It is always in a kind of a rhizomatic, here I am, I'm starting to be theoretical, all
Very
right?
good.
In a rhizomatic relationship with the dominant. But it can also be dialectical. So it has this very complex relationship with what is dominant. And the dominant is the commercial movie industry that has a lot of capital, a lot of technology, and has so much superiority. This is where you need to see the context of alternative cinema. So who are we? We are amateur filmmakers. We don't have capital. Our equipment are all amateurs. Video, when it was starting, we were being laughed at as that's not cinema. Short film. There were some people in the media who were telling us, Mr. Deocampo, what is it that you cannot understand? Short film is not a film. They're talking to me. They're talking to me. Short film. Who told you that all films need to be a long feature narrative film? So the navigation that I had in such difficult times, we were campaigning our own alternative efforts within the movie industry. Consider this at the time of a military political regime, at the time of military dictatorship, that looked at cinema as its ally in trying to control the people. I hope you can appreciate exactly the level of difficulty that we had. On top of it would be the technology. We did not have the technology. We were dependent on what the French government or the Goethe Institute could possibly supply us or lend to us. All right. So it was a guerrilla form of, so another word that we can have, it's not people cinema, that it is guerrilla cinema. So what are these forms, as you have asked? These are mainly short films, seen with reference to the long films that have long dominated the definition of what cinema is. Cinema is the long feature. So when it is short, it is not and cannot be shown in the movie theaters. So it was a triumph, for example, when I had film festivals that would put the short films inside the commercial movie theaters. I remember Kidlat Tahimik tapping my back and said, man, you've made it. We were only at the fringes and in the margins of society. Now you brought us into the mainstream because I want to have a head-on collision with the mainstream audience. It did not come easy. There were shoutings here and there. But in the end, look, the public acceptance for short films, documentaries. Imagine, with documentary, you are banging your head against fiction, and cinema can only be thought of as fictional, as dramatic. So here we are, we have real people talking about real events, talking about real life. How do people react to that? The other thing too is experimental, the film language. This is where I'm very passionate, because in order to change a cinema, you cannot avoid changing the language of that cinema. So at least these three, and there are many I can invoke, but we are limited with time. And I just don't want to be talking here. I would love to hear how people react to these issues. But those three elements, the definition of form, the definition of aesthetics, the definition of ideology, the definition of the function of cinema. We tried to answer all of this, and alternative cinema has its own set of answers.
Thank you so much. I think this is all so rich and brings out all the layers, from the technical challenges to the circulation to the production. I mean, and I think what has obviously the most changed in recent years, and also how, let's say, revolutions have been documented, is the new technology that we all have access to. Now with the mobile phones, everyone is technically equipped to document and to make commentaries and maybe even short films around these urgent social questions. So how has your own definition of maybe alternative cinema evolved, given this new, especially type of circulation? Is that something you also cover in your book? You said you go until the latest sort of multimedia, expressions.
Circulation is a major issue. And thankfully, during the first year, I was able to already address that. The festival became a platform. I don't know what came to my mind. I don't know. That was 1982. I don't know what came to my mind that, so we make films, and so what? There were no managers, no exhibitors, no movie theaters that wanted to show us. So what are we going to do with our 9 films? I was so proud of the 9 films that were produced by the students in that workshop. So I said, we need to create a platform. And then I thought of a festival. And now, as you can see, almost every part of the world has a short film or alternative film festival. Philippines was very much isolated at the time. So again, I need to reflect so much on what inspired me to think of a festival and turned it into a platform to show alternative cinema. So back to the issue of circulation. Here is where the network and the alliance started to happen. I started knocking on the doors of other universities, and I found out, hey, they were producing Super 8 films in their workshops. And so I asked the nearby university, can you show that film in our workshop? Out of competition, because the competition I had was among the 9 films. So the films coming from the other universities, and they just started pouring in. This is where the first creation of an alternative film community happened. It was a discovery, but the network happened. And I didn't have a name for it before. And now I have, courtesy of my study in New York University, all right? I took up my master's in New York University. So that was where I met, or I first encountered the word rhizomatic. So we are thinking here of the 2 French. I just love the French, right? The French, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, who came up with this concept of the rhizome. The rhizome is a network. The rhizome is expressed in multiplicity. It cannot be singular, because being singular is being arborescent, which is the enemy of the rhizomatic. An arborescent is the tree, singular, hierarchical, genealogical, all right? Very fascistic. Singular, erect, a phallus, a dick, all right? Whereas we're talking about the rhizome, which is horizontal, spread out, all right? It is connected. That's another key word. It's anti-hierarchical, and in the end, it's very emancipative. Because of its multiplicity, then it becomes very emancipative. So the point that I try to do here now is that I tried to internalize exactly in a theoretical, intellectual way the practice that I was doing. First came the practice. Silke, that was the important part. We are human beings, and I thought I was just doing my work. I had to earn a living. But on top of it, I need to get something in return from out of it. I'm not just one hell of a slave. I'm not an automaton that's out there to just do something for an institution. I had my inner agenda. And the sad thing is when these institutions that fed me discovered what the hell was my agenda and it was running against theirs, then suddenly that's when I lose my job. Okay. I lost it twice. All right. So now the point is, first it was economic. It was very physical. I had to do those workshops. I was just doing a job, delivering all the films that, that could be made. But on top of it, when everybody else is asleep, in the dead of night, I would sit down and I didn't have a typewriter. There was no computer then. I would write in longhand everything that I had. I kept diaries. I kept journals. I wrote my manifestos. I wrote poetry. I wrote essays. I started writing my book. That's why it took 40 years for this book to be written. You will see some of the ancient lines here coming from my notes in Paris in the cold of winter. In the cold of winter. I'm just becoming emotional about it because I have this image in my mind. While everybody is asleep already, there I was writing, looking at the snow falling outside and writing. I see, so all this book is an accumulation of all the years of journal writing, diary writing, manifesto writing, conversations, interviews, God name it. And so having said that, your question is, so how do I respond to it now with all this technological revolution happening in the digital age? I see it is still the continuing fulfillment of the promise of the rhizome. From the analog, we went into video, which was analog in the beginning, and now we are in the digital, and now we're going into the hologram, and now we are going into virtual reality, and now we are going into 360 degrees. It's limitless, but still, they still are defined as cinema. The technology changes, but there is what Guattari and Deleuze mentioned as the middle. You see, I was able to penetrate into what is it exactly that the rhizome is telling us. What is essential is the middle. What is the middle? And for me, the middle is the motion picture. It can change its medium. It can change from analog film to analog video to digital to virtual to God knows what will be invented in 2050. But in the end, this is still the promise of an ever-evolving cinema. And cinema, I simply define as motion picture. The circulation, just to end this discussion now, so how do you evolve? First you start as marginalized. So alternative cinema is also defined by space, social space. We really started to be in the margins. So we are marginalized. But instead of fretting and being disappointed, we celebrated our marginality, our queerness. I'm a queer filmmaker. Let's talk about that later on, because that is another layer of what I want to talk about. I mean, we cannot just be so ideological about this. We can also be affectual. I'm an emotional person. And my emotions are not similar to the many mainstream gendered people out there. I'm queer. I love my own kind and I want my space and I will fight for that space and I want to expand my space. So we are 7,100 islands. Silke and are okay. I want an end to the imperial dictates of Manila as a cultural center. So I grew up in an island down south, Panay, specifically in Iloilo. That was my first base. So I went home to my old hometown and introduced the film there. Of course, My mother was just scandalized by it. Why are you showing all these nude bodies? And she's very Catholic, and it's a very Catholic society. What can I do? But I kept coming back with more nude bodies, all right? And people just started to like it, and the young people. And I had my first workshops there. Then we went to the next nearby island. Then we went to Mindanao. Then when we went up north to the mountains, and before you know it, we were defining the nation as regions, the birth of regional cinema. There was a recognition now that we are not centered, which is very much against the principle of rhizomatic, because Deleuze and Guattari are telling us that the rhizome is acentered. It has no center. It only has a lot of linearities. So that was what I was creating. And in creating those linearities, you put them together, define that space again, and you have an assemblage, or a network, or a kind of an assembly of like-minded thing. And we have gone so far in this digital age, despite the pandemic. While the movie industry in the Philippines has really collapsed, I declare that Philippine cinema, we are now living in the age of alternative cinema. Anybody who wants to debate with me, I'm ready. We are now in the age of alternative cinema because we cannot even count, and nobody is doing this, the number of alternative films that are being produced in every island, in every school, in every community in this country. You bet every island, and we have 7,000 islands. All right? How many young people are making films? And mind you, TikTok is cinema. I mean, anybody who says contrary, has got a problem. So there is a sad thing about this inability to even inventory the films that we have, because we cannot archive them. They have no names. They can just disappear. They can be erased. So my other passion is archiving. I'm sorry, I'm putting another layer here.
No, and all these layers are on our
Yeah.
paper too.
Yes.
I'll
continue.
end there. I'll end there so that we can talk about it at another time.
No, you should keep talking about it. But I think before we open open the discussion to the audience here as well, maybe let's speak a little bit more about the communities.
Yes.
Because I think the rhizomatic approach, that is so key in your writing and your approach to life in general, also made a big difference in how you engage different communities, speaking from within, speaking nearby, having the possibility to become a voice for many different communities. So I would love to speak a little bit about this, because this has become very hard in the current world, where you have to be extremely careful what you can talk about, what you're entitled to speak about. And I think that was a big change also in recent years, how identity and representation became very dominant frames, of how we speak about communities. So if you could develop a little bit just on this
First
point.
of all, let me really make a clarification. This interview, and it can't be avoided. I mean, I'm talking on a first person point of view, only because I fought the struggle. Some people may deny me that. It's part of life. But I know I was there, and my book is written on a first person point of view. At this point, nobody has contradicted me about it. It is my eyewitness account. I survived, and I'm telling the tale. However, I was not alone. Or perhaps there were also similar Nick Deocampos happening and doing their own thing. Let me mention Kidlat Tahimik. If Kidlat Tahimik is here, I'm sure he's going to talk about what he was doing up in the mountains. If you have Cavan de la Cruz, whose films you need to screen as well, we'll be talking about his own Filmless Collective. All right? So you put us all together, all these individuals. I consider this a band of filmmakers, courageous filmmakers, who worked in all forms of difficulties, whether it was political, economic, technological, ideological, affectual, social, cultural. You put all of these things together. We were individuals. We were nodes in a rhizome. But you put us together, we have interconnectivity. So this was manifested in the Dry Lava Film Festival, which mounted the largest alternative film retrospective that brought 3 generations of Kidlat-Tahimik, belonging to the first generation, my generation, which fought during the most difficult political time and really articulated what we needed to articulate, and then the third generation, which is Cavan de la Cruz, who is facing this digital revolution and creating a new frontier out of digital cinema. So just seeing the 3 of us together was for me a landmark historical event. Now, having said that, you're asking me about, how do we define the collectivity? So it's difficult to put all of these hard-headed individuals together. We had to maintain our spaces. So Kidlat has his own followers. Maybe I have my own, my students, the filmmakers who gravitated around me. But with the change of technology, and I'm getting old, all right, I'm not very active anymore, all right. I'm more intellectual. I'm in the university. I'm now a film professor, and I would rather write books, write down all the thoughts that I have. They need to be recorded. I cannot allow this to be merely a vanishing practice, but rather I am now taking the position of a historian. So that's another hat I put on, because we need to tell a story, especially the survival of why we are here and what we fought against. There were lessons to be learned. And with Cavan de la Cruz, he's fighting his own digital war. And we have respect for each other. You see, the beauty of the rhizome is that we are a collectivity. Silke, however, I may insist that we did not drop the whole idea of fighting for identity and representation during that time. So may I bring now something very personal? While all my other students are making their own films, I drew out something deep inside me, and that is my gender consciousness. I'm a homosexual. Growing up in a very patriarchal, military, militant society under martial law. My father fought in World War II. He screamed and shouted at me never to be a homosexual because I'm just an embarrassment. My mother can simply cry. I lost friends because I'm a bloody homosexual. And I can't stop it. I mean, I'm myself, so after being sent to a psychiatrist, being drugged to change me and everything, being prayed over, hell, I'm myself, I'm me. And that became not only my advocacy. So I started not only making my queer films, and some now consider it to be among the, maybe in Asia as well. Can you imagine 1982, 83, who was making queer movies? There was Farewell, My Concubine, but what year did it come out? When did Happy Together came out? What was going on in 1982? And there I was creating queer film festivals, against the state-sponsored censorship boards, wherein I even have to kneel before the chief censor begging to show this queer movie of Lino Broca. I will do anything, hang upside down and everything, just to create that space, because I have sold out tickets. The queer community just came in and banged into the theater, and now I have nothing to show. So they delayed it for a day, then finally issued the film the next day, and there it was. Controversy also can do good for films like this. So my identity as a homosexual, as a queer filmmaker, became more intense when I studied in New York. That's where I studied Michel Foucault and the notion of power and sexual power and my right as a homosexual. I joined all of those parades and and seminars and protests. It was the height of the AIDS. My God, I was in the AIDS capital in 1989. You can just imagine a homosexual from the Philippines, scared as I was, that, oh my God, somebody just coughed in the railway, and oh my God, how can I go to a public toilet? I mean, but it was New York. I survived it, and at the end, I learned a lot from that experience. So all of these things, I don't know if I answered your question directly, but there it was.
No, you did. And I think creating that space is really what we also want to do tonight. And so I would think it's time now to open our discussion to the floor.
Yes.
Are there already any questions or comments or things you want to talk to with Nick? We have a microphone that's available.
First of all, I want to thank everybody who braved the storm. I don't know, is the storm still there?
No.
It was made in the Philippines, It came from the Philippines. That was a Philippine-made storm.
Yeah, it was excellent, but it's gone now.
It's gone now. All right, sunny day. Hello, everybody. Let's have a conversation.
Yes, so maybe people want to warm up a little bit. Okay, if not, then I think we can still... No, there's a question. Great.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question about you mentioned about the film language. In the past, you want to change the mainstream cinema. I have a question about that. Because like the film language actually is a kind of like actually is like when you growing up, then maybe Hollywood or other mainstream movie actually educate you are the film language already formed in somehow. Maybe you are more successful or more talented or more lucky, you can go out and then learn other stuff. But in the Philippines, maybe other young filmmaker, they are just is a kind of brainwashed by the mainstream or film language. So how do you like change their film language or invent a new film language? Because it takes times. It cannot be changed in a short term of time. So how do you like adjust that or find something new? Yeah.
I love the question. You really touch my heart because film language is at the very heart of the struggle. So you are correct. Without our knowing it, Hollywood has been teaching us how to speak cinematically through what is called as the most popular language in the world. No country, no culture has escaped this. It is called the classical Hollywood narrative cinema. It is even being taught in our school. Believe me, we teach how to make Hollywood movies. And when you teach how to make Hollywood movies, you're really teaching them the language of classical Hollywood narrative cinema. So having said that, you have a brilliant question. How do you change the tide, which is almost impossible? So I have a very simple mission. I believe in workshops. My battleground is the workshop. I have 10 people, I will start with 10 people. I have 15 students, I will start with 15 students. And you are so correct again when you said it is a long struggle. Imagine I tried to help change the film language 25 years ago, but in my own personal practice, even 40 years ago, I speak the documentary language, which does not necessarily follow the classical Hollywood cinema, because we are dealing with indexical, real people, while the movie industry is dealing with fictional, dramatic narratives. I have no time to make all of these ramifications, but two things that I answer you. One, time was on my side. And I was patient. But look, my hair is now white. I used to have afro hair. I look beautiful 40 years ago or 25 years ago. You know, there were Frenchmen who liked me. Okay, I mean, sorry, but my point is, I grew old just trying to tell whoever wants to listen. And my sanctuary was the workshop. So if you come to my workshop, you can be sure. If you don't like what I'm teaching you, you can get out. I give you back your small fee that you paid. You can leave. But look what happened to these young people who attended my workshops and who I bothered their minds that there's another language, people. Look, there's another language. And try to discover your own language. Go back to the mountains where you first were born. Go back to the island. Go back to the film itself. Destroy it. So even in creating that language, you know, some of the students, but this is really courtesy of the German aesthetics, the group of Christoph Janetzko from Berlin, you know, some of our students responded to this change of language by drowning or putting their celluloid film, which is made of chemicals, in the acidic solutions, or maybe or burying them under the ground and taking them out after 2 weeks and seeing exactly that all colors exploded because the chemicals started to become disrupted, and suddenly new images, new film language are created. Now, the next question is, so who will be our audience if we have a new language? That's where I have seminars. Outside of my workshops, I have seminars, or we create seminars. That's why I turn the film festivals I organize. Nobody leaves the theater after watching an experimental film because there will be a discussion. And that is not something being done in a commercial movie industry. You do not hold the audience. So what did I do? Because the theater management simply said, our role is not to hold back the audience. So I said, how much can I rent your movie theater? If I rent it, I can do everything I want, right? And they said, yes, whatever you want. But pay us the flat rent. Okay, 18,000 pesos, I pay you 18,000. 500,000 pesos, I pay you. I look for the money. But look, I'm going to turn it into a classroom. There you go. And not only that, write. Keep on writing. Then people will read it in the provinces. Oh, not only that, then you go to the provinces and the islands. As I said, 10 people is great. I'm anti-mainstream, which talks about popular cinema. They talk about millions of viewers. I'm afraid of that. I want to deal with communities. I'm a rhizome. The rhizome are small people. We're small, but see us in a bigger perspective, then we can become many. And time, that you said, you need to have patience. An educator must be a patient person. And thank God, after 40 years, after 25 years in running Mobile Fund, you know, something is coming out from what we planted many years ago. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did. I think it's very important that you mentioned also really these platforms where people could see what was created, you know, because I think that is also very key, you know, when a new language is developed, that people get a chance to have a shared aesthetic experience around these new works. And also, yeah, as you said, writing and, you know, just accompanying these moments. Do you want to add something? Yes.
Yeah, may I just bring it to what I'm doing now? Because
sure.
What
yes.
I'm doing now, the question that was asked, thank you very much, because that's a very key question to my struggle now that I bring to the intellectual level. And what I'm trying to say here is, I am now into semiotics. Film language has an operation. It has mechanics. And now my new book, the new book I'm writing now is about semiotics, or the study of signs. And mind you, cinema is nothing but signs. Stop telling me that cinema is a story. So this is where I'm anti-Hollywood again. Story is another form of sign, a narrative sign, but it is a sign. But cinema is more than just a narrative sign. It is indexical, it is iconic, it is symbolic, it operates in a lot of levels. So what I'm trying to decipher now, what I'm trying to research in and study very well, very, very seriously, is cinema a sign? Because the questions I ask now is, how does cinema form itself into a language? You see, there are two trends in semiotics. One is linguistic, another one is really signage. So there is language in cinema, and this is where we are discussing. It's very, very difficult and complex, but I'm trying to really study and reflect on how Filipino films have really formed our language under colonization, under dictatorship, under repression, under Catholicism, under popular escapist culture. So all of these things are very important for me. Sign and context. This is where my mind is going right now. That the language does not happen overnight. This is where I discover that Hollywood really controlled the language of our cinema. And can we overturn it? If we are to change the rules in terms of the language, what are the levers? What are the things that we need to do? That's where I'm studying now. So I'm more tactical. I'm very tactical in my approach towards the idea of film language. I want to know how it works so I can deconstruct it and see exactly how it functions.
I think we have still maybe 5 minutes, but are you in touch with other international film scholars as well when developing this sort of new approach of how you think about cinema? Because that's no longer tied to necessarily just the Philippines.
The challenge that I gave when I was at the Czech Republic 3 days ago was there is a need, a clamor that we will bring Philippine cinema to Prague next year because it's the 50th anniversary of the Czech-Philippine relation. So I said, I just don't want us to show films, but is there, because I heard that there were a lot of good semioticians coming from Central Europe from Czech, Hungary, etc. So I said, I want us to have a conference on the semiotics of cinema, studying Filipino films and Czech films, all right, next year. But anyway, that's one. But mostly, yes, my former professors from New York University, and while I was in New York, some of the most eminent historians, like from Yale University, Dr. Charles Musser, the eminent professor on American film history. I learned a lot, and we have a very good academic relationship. He contributed in the books that I write. Dr. Dina Iordanova from University of St. Andrews. So there's a network. Again, my rhizome has become bigger. All right, and it's great. I know I'm not alone anymore. These are ideas, but I can contribute something new and something unique in this international discourse because I'm working on a very specific film culture. I really hope there can be another question or two. I just want to hear your thoughts.
Okay, we have one by Cici.
Yes.
Cici, are you there?
Can you see her? She's waving her
Hi,
hand.
Nick.
Oh,
Can
I
you
don't
hear
see her, but I hear you.
Hi, long time no see.
Yeah, I know. How are you? Okay.
I'm good.
You make me nervous.
I just came back from Beijing, and like the political situation is changing, and we do have a really, I think, kind of sensitive, and the political climate is very intense there, dictator for life. So I just wonder about the relationship of counter cinema or alternative cinema in the Philippines in relation to censorship. And I'm thinking about censorship a lot also because it's in Hong Kong. And I think as filmmakers, artists, art workers, we're all facing this problem. And seems like it's a really safe space today. So I wonder what you think about it.
Yeah. Very difficult question to answer. And I do not want to presume that I have any very helpful suggestions to what is happening in China or what is happening in any other part of the world. I responded to the censorship in the Philippines in a way that I knew how. So it is very contextual. We, together with Lino Broca, you know, we were out, you know, I joined the protests that we did. We were as loud as we could, but we knew when to attack and when we knew when to retreat. Even Lino Broca knew that. So let me really say that we became loud and militant only after Marcos already left the office, his presidency. But I will be very frank with you, at the height of the Marcos dictatorship, there was nothing we could do. Very disappointing, isn't it? All right. As a historian, I have been researching on what exactly were the films that were produced under the military regime that really attacked the Marcos dictatorship when Marcos was in power. I'll tell you, there was no direct film that assaulted Marcos. So what is this Lino Broca protesting against censorship? It came after. All right, so in my book right now, I can separate the episodes during the time of the dictatorship. And remember, this is now the 50th anniversary. We just commemorated the 50th anniversary of the military regime, which happened for 20 years. And I made it clear to the hundreds of students who listened to, you know, the conferences which I attended or my personal, you know, my individual lectures, that I told them that, you know, you want to learn about censorship, how do we fight that? But during the heat of that censorship, we need to exercise a lot of caution. In my case, what I thought was, I'm going to survive this regime. I'm going to write about it. I'm going to do a lot of things, but not to protect your life. You know, you need to have security, and you don't have that under a military regime. However, what is this claim that is being made by my program there that, you know, it was an anti-military dictatorship? It happened only when Marcos was already in the twilight of his powers. He does not have a control over his government machinery. So you must know, here you are as artists. It's either you keep everything, internalize it. That's your job as an artist. You know, feel it, write it, record it, document it, keep it. But know the time when you have to be ready to do battle. That's part of your survival strategy. So when we were beginning to see that the dictatorship was beginning to crumble, you see, I made my film actually already in 1982, and that was 1 year after Marcos lifted the military regime, because Pope John Paul VI, all right, Pope John Paul II was coming to the Philippines, and it would be shameful for the dictatorship to still have the military regime when we are the only Catholic in Asia. So Marcos lifted martial law because the Pope was coming. So by 1982, get ready to fight. And as I said, that's the year I returned from Paris. I was equipped intellectually and artistically how to make amateur films. So I started to make my films that you will see tonight. Oliver was made in 82, ended up finished in 83. All right, among the first to really radically articulate the discontent, showing exactly a very marginalized, prostituted community. And I belong to that. Oh, I'm not a prostitute. I mean, I belong to that. I identify myself with all these marginalized sex workers, because it seemed like it was the only space I could find for my homosexuality. I mean, so I started documenting it by the middle of 1982. Then by 1983, I was ready to have the film out. It took me 10 months to make it. And you know what happened by 1983? Ninoy Aquino was shot and all hell broke loose. So you as an artist must know when to punch. This is our time. This is our opportunity. This is what we've been waiting for. So Sisi, that's what I can say. What is happening in China is highly secured. The control of society is strong. Maybe it's good to be away from the country for a while, but keep watching. No human being lasts forever. No institution can last forever. Oh, and here's the final thing I'm going to say. Be part of social movement. So while we were not really making head-on artistic productions, we were involved, and here is the important point I wanted to say. This is the important one, that we were not just relaxed and, waiting for things to happen, waiting for an apple to fall. We were doing our social activities. I had my activism. Education for me is an activist job. That was where I was teaching students how to speak another language. We were destroying film language. I was teaching them reality rather than fiction. Documentary is the truth. Documentary is truth. And that runs against cinema is fiction by the movie industry. So I was planting my seeds, but we could not go out. We were not crazy enough. We're just too damn intelligent to protect ourselves, because here's my only philosophy. I need to survive my oppressors. And collectively, we need to survive our oppressors, because one day it will come, the emancipation will have to happen. And indeed, it happened. And here is the thing. Are we ready? Are we ready when that happens? I mean, big talk. Yeah, I know. But my history bears me out, because we lived that life. We were able to find our opportunities. That's all I can say, I guess. So I don't know what advice I can give.
No,
Thank
I think
you
it's
for
a
whoever's
wonderful.
clapping there. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Somebody
thank
at the back
you.
is clapping.
Yes, yes. There's a very wonderful atmosphere here, and I'm glad that you can hopefully feel it across the screen as well. And I'm very sad, but I think we come to the end of this talk now, because we have the screening starting in 10 minutes, and
Oh
we
my
need
God.
to let people, go down to the cinema. And so this is really, to thank you, Nick, for this incredible talk, for your presence and generosity. Maybe we can give you some applause from here.
Thank you too. And I really am sorry I'm not there. It would have been more electric, if we have an encounter with each other.
You're
All
also
right.
electric on the screen, I must say. It's fantastic. And we are still hoping to bring you another time,
Oh,
Yeah, and
all
as you just, mentioned the whole scholarship you're writing, we will definitely be in touch. I think that's very relevant for all the topics that we are studying at the moment. So we will create more opportunities and be ready when the time comes.
So Silke and Ariadne, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for just as you're still here, so tomorrow we have a screening at 5:15 in the afternoon, and this will be also followed by a post-screening discussion with Nick. So for those who want to come back tomorrow, there's a second chance to talk with Nick after the screening. Okay, so thank you again,
Thank you.
Nick, and have a good
Thank you, Nick.
evening. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.